Hello, guys. Today I'm shooting in the evening because I just figured out that there is something really important I have to share. I was requested to shoot this episode, so I decided to do so spontaneously. That's why the topic of today's episode is what to say if you're asked about the gap in your CV. Imagine a situation, you finished a contract for a year or even more, you were traveling around, or you were finishing your projects from the last contract. Well, in certain areas of the job market, the standard actually, especially if you work in academia, it's often the case that your contract formally ends, yet you're still expected to finish your projects nevertheless. And many people do. They feel compelled and disciplined and motivated and also responsible for their team members for the project, so they still work and finish the projects even though they are no longer paid. And I had that too, actually. So the question is, what do we say once we are asked this question? And of course, if you have a gap in your CV, this question might be asked. So once asked, why do you have a gap in your CV? Most people say one of the two things, and both of these answers are wrong. One of them is, oh yeah, I have a gap in my CV because, well, I didn't have a job. I was looking for a job, but I just didn't find any yet. So yeah, I have a gap in my CV. So they excuse themselves why they have a gap in their CV. And it sounds like, well, apparently they are not competitive enough in the job market. So that doesn't really look good for the recruiter. And second thing they say is, well, oh yeah, I was traveling. I was looking for my way. I was working on myself, and I was just giving myself time. And that also doesn't sound good for a recruiter. They will be like, well, you are in your 30s. Why do you behave like you were 20 right now? Like you there was time in your 20s, now if you travel for a year, it sounds like running away from life. It doesn't sound good to me. It doesn't sound like professional development at all. In this episode, I'd like to give you some examples of the things you might say to the question, why do you have a gap in your CV, to actually impress the recruiter. The first thing I asked a person who asked the question is, what did you do in this year or 2 years or 3 years when you were not employed? And what we find out most of the time, it turns out that they did a lot. They just don't know about it. So the first message I have for you is, you probably did a lot of things that are good for your professional development in the long run. If you phrase it properly, then you will appear as a responsible person who thinks about professional development and who knows what they're doing with their life. And I have to say, it's all about how you phrase what you were doing within that time. The mistake number one that people do when they are asked the question, why do you have a gap in your CV, is that they start excusing themselves. So instead of saying what they were doing, they actually focus on the things they didn't do during that period. So they say, well, I did not work because, and then they basically list the excuses why this is so. Like, the employer doesn't really care about that. It's not about what you didn't do, but what you did within that period of time. And you should flip the question and talk only about the things, all the activities that you undertook within that period of time that might help in your professional development. And believe me, you did a lot. First thing, if you were finishing your project for your previous contract, say it. And people often avoid mentioning about working on their projects from the last contract because they feel that it will give the employer the impression that they are not productive enough. And that's why they didn't manage to finish their work within a certain time frame. So this really depends on how you phrase the answer to the question. Because if you say, well, I didn't finish my projects in time, so I was working on my projects for longer. Well, that might sound fishy. That might sound like you indeed didn't really manage your productivity enough to finish in time. But if you say, the funding for my project unfortunately dried out, yet I felt responsible for the project, I felt responsible for the team, I was interested in the topic, I decided to finish in my own time for the sake of the project because I don't jump the ship. Well, that sounds very different from the first version. If you frame your answer like this, you can be sure that it will be taken as a positive trait. You will show yourself as a responsible person who doesn't jump the ship, who doesn't leave their teammates no matter what. even if in unforeseen circumstances, hard circumstances, you still finish the project. So that would be one thing you should definitely mention. Second thing, if you were physically ill in this period, for instance, you were hospitalized, there was some illness you were struggling with, but you're healthy now, I would definitely mention, because this is not your fault. This is not laziness. This was independent circumstance that happened to you. It can happen to anyone. And in this case, it's important that you mention, because there are two types of illnesses. There are like two types of reasons why people are out of the market for health-related problems. One of them is physical illness. Second is mental problems. And this is often the case today, that a lot of professionals suffer with mental problems, burnout, depression. And of course, nothing wrong with that. But the point is, for the employer, there's a fundamental difference between the two. So if you suffer from physical illness, well, and then you get over it, well, there is a good chance that it won't come back. Even more importantly, it's not contagious. If you were like physically ill, let's say you broke your leg, now you're fine, back on track, this will not transpire to the rest of your team. Whereas if you had severe mental problems, for the employer, this might be a reason to worry, because there might be a reason to think, well, maybe this person is just not strong on their mind. Maybe they are not resilient to stress. This is a problem that might come back in the future. And for worse, this is one of the issues that often are contagious. So if this person becomes like deeply unhappy and unmotivated to work, that might also spoil the atmosphere on the team. Other team members might also lose their morale, lose their motivation to work. So this is more like even more than a problem with one employee, then it becomes a problem with the dynamics of the whole team. If your illness was purely physical, I would just mention it, because it's much less of a problem. It's a logic reason why you have a gap on your CV. Nothing wrong with that, can happen to anyone. Even if you spend a year or more in your bed, it's not a reason to be feel intimidated. And there's always a way of framing your answer in a way that makes you even more credible and even more appealing as a potential employee to the employer. For instance, you might say something like, well, indeed, I was away from work for 6 months or 12 months. I was laying in bed, I was thinking a lot, and now I feel more motivated than ever. I love my work. Now I know it after being away for such a long time. I miss what I was doing. I know now that this is what I want to do for a living. And I cannot wait for the day when I can get back to my desk and do what I used to do and love. And I hope that you give me a chance to start over with you. And this is a perfectly fine answer, and that's a heartwarming story. It has a good ending. It makes the employer know that you're motivated. All right. And now let's talk a little bit more about the situation when you didn't have any health-related issues, yet you want to say something, because of course you were asked for explaining why you were not working and what was happening in all this period. So as mentioned before, even if you formally didn't have any job, you definitely did a lot to improve your position in the job market, and you might just not know it. So the first question you should ask yourself is, did I take any courses? Because, well, perhaps you did. It might have been a course that is closely related to your profession. It might also be a course that is loosely related. For instance, it might be a mindfulness course. It might be a course on productivity. It might be a foreign language course. But nevertheless, most courses are quotable. There is almost nothing I can think of that might be so unrelated to your work that it's not worth mentioning. So if you took any courses, I would say I was broadening my perspective in the job market by increasing my scope of knowledge, increasing my skills. I was working on my qualifications by taking online courses and practicing, even though I was not employed. Second thing you can say is, well, I was working on my professional network. This is also very important, and I'm sure you, within that period of time, you were attending online conferences or meetups, or maybe on-site meetups in person, that you have friends whom you were talking to in private, who have interesting professions, who are in your field. even that counts as building a professional network. So if you frame it like this, it sounds like you take your career seriously. You never sleep, you're never out of the market for real, because even if you formally don't have a job for a period of time, you still work on your long-term professional development by increasing the breadth and width of your network. The next thing you can say is, I was working on my productivity. I was working on finding the optimal scheme, and I was experimenting to figure out how I can make myself most productive. And that's also perfectly fine. I still do that. I experiment with different waking hours and different productivity tools, and I'm trying to figure out how I can reach my optimal productivity scheme. And it's still not obvious for me what is my perfect scheme. Better to say that you were working on yourself, even if it's just about productivity, because it's closely related to your professional life in the long run, rather than saying, well, I did not work because this and that, and I was trying, but there are no jobs available on the market. Just focus on the things you did, even if it's as little as trying Pomodoro with different ratio between work and rest. Also, everything that is related to creating new intellectual property is good, such as, for instance, writing an ebook or blogging, or maybe you were trying some new YouTube channel in that period of time. Every initiative that is related to creativity and creating your own content is positive, is evidence that you are productive, that you have your own ideas, and employers look for it because they don't want yet another copy of a copy of a copy, another graduate who thinks that they are a snowflake and they have high claims, high expectations, but they don't really want to give. They want someone creative who is naturally motivated, who is a fountain of ideas, who transpires their enthusiasm to people around them. If you voluntarily create content just because you are like that, you wake up in the morning and you just have that inner desire to create and create and create, you will be wanted. Next, if you have any experience with volunteering, if you volunteered at any project, if you built some online community, even if it was for a short period of time, or even if your initiative didn't finally work out, it's still good to mention, because again, this is a sign of initiative. This is a sign that you're not a person who sits still with arms crossed, and you always are occupied with something constructive and productive in your life. This is a common desire people have. They want to contribute, they want to build something, and non-profit project is nothing to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. So if you had any initiative running in the period of time when you were not employed, definitely you should mention it. It is the same with trying to pull off a business. If during the period of time when you were not employed, you had a plan to launch your own company or your own freelancing practice, yet for some reasons it didn't work out, I would still mention it, because again, it's a sign of initiative, it's a sign of self-development, it's a sign of a drive to build something new. And employers know that how hard business is, and most new businesses fail, and most people who eventually manage to build a business fail multiple times at first. So there is nothing to be ashamed of if your business idea didn't work out. It's a reason to be proud, because it's something that most people think of at least once in their lifetime, and most of them never have enough courage to try. So if you had enough courage to try, even if it didn't work out, for the employer, it's a sign that you have a wide range of positive traits that will also make you a good employee. And lastly, what is really smart to say, and what very few people do, yet I think the recruiter that you have an interview with will truly enjoy hearing, is talking about your finances and the general knowledge about the economy. So if you were reading anything about the market, if you're thinking about your savings, creating some financial cushion, if you're reading anything related to finances, economy, investments, etc., you can say something like, I was working on creating a financial cushion. I was working on figuring out what is the best investment strategy for me. I spend a lot of time reading about this because I know that for my long-term professional development, it's really important that I have that financial safety. I can peacefully work without feeling afraid that I will lose my job. Because there's this stereotype There is this common stereotype that employers love employees who are dependent, employees who are in debt, employees who are insecure financially. No, what employers want is a happy employee who is confident, who chose them because they wanted to, not because they had to, and who is aware of their finances, of economy, of how the world outside looks, who is conscious and who knows themselves very well, who has all the areas of life sorted out properly, and is overall happy, not just glued to their job because they have nothing else going on in their life. So if you say something like this, well, I was working on my knowledge about economy, on my consciousness about what's happening in the markets right now, and I sorted out my finances so that now I feel safe, I feel confident, and I am safe and sound in my life, and that's what I spend my time on. Then it will be respected. The recruiter will be like, okay, well, this person is serious. This person knows what they are doing with their life. They stand on their feet. They are reasonable. They will be nice to work with. I cannot stress this enough. People naturally like company of people who are money aware. There was a period of time when I was looking for jobs as well. And every single time I mentioned to the recruiter, yes, I spent a few months sorting out my finances and learning about economy and investments. Every single time, the response was very, very, very positive. They were like, oh, maybe you can teach me something at lunch. They were starting to think, hey, how can I get around this person? This person knows something that I would like to know myself. Like, everyone needs to know how money works, how to make investments. If you are aware of the economy, of finances, of investments, personal investment strategies, if you have that aura of wisdom around money, people want to deal with you. People want to have you around. People feel safe around you. So there's nothing wrong mentioning about the fact that you are money aware. So these are the tips I have for you. These are the things I think will work well to say once you're asked, what were you doing in your gap year?